We do need to consider whether, if we're going to advance Mr. Trump's agenda, whether the current leadership is what we need.
I remain undecided, as do a number of my colleagues, because we solved so many of the failures last year.
I don't trust him that he's going to deliver. For the last year, he's been a speaker. Every time he folded to the swamp.
In the end, all that sound and fury from the so-called real conservatives vowing to push back against Speaker Mike Johnson's bid to keep control of the gavel, as per usual, signified nothing more than empty chest pounding. You had 7 of these real Republicans initially remaining silent when their names were called during today's House Speaker vote, only to go Johnson's way when their names were called again at the end. And while it seems that one of them, Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, Trump's nominee for National Security Advisor, might not have actually heard his name called the first time around, there were 3 Republicans who initially cast votes against Johnson: Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Ralph Norman of South Carolina, and Keith Self of Texas. And given Republicans' paper-thin majority, that was 2 more than Johnson could afford to lose. Perhaps that's why we saw Johnson walk Norman and Self off the floor to try and change their minds. And since he had previously claimed that he would not make any deals, no quid pro quos for him, Johnson went another route, getting Donald Trump on the phone to win them over. And lo and behold, they decided to change their votes, giving Johnson just enough votes to remain Speaker by a margin of 3 votes over Democrat Hakeem Jeffries. Of course, Trump had his own reasons for getting involved, given that had Republicans failed to elect a Speaker by Monday, the House would not have been able to certify his election on the traditional day. You might have heard of it, January 6th. Turns out the only Republican to follow through with his threat to vote against Johnson was this guy.
You can pull all my fingernails out. You can shove bamboo up in them. You can start cutting off my fingers. I am not voting for Mike Johnson tomorrow. And you can take that to the bank.
No torture necessary. Turns out all the tough talk from these other Republicans was just that. In the end, they did what President Elon told them to do. President-elect Trump told them to do. But the real moment of the day came after the initial roll call, when Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, a non-voting delegate from the House from the U.S. Virgin Islands, rose to make a point.
I have a parliamentary inquiry. I note that the names of the representatives from the Americas Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia were not called, representing collectively 4 million Americans.
The clerk offered this explanation for why those delegates were left out.
Delegates-elect and the resident commissioner-elect are not qualified to vote. Representatives-elect are the only individuals qualified to vote in the election of a speaker. As provided in Section 36 of the House Rules and Manual, the speaker is elected by a majority of the members-elect voting by surname.
Mr. Speaker, this body and this nation has a territories and a colonies problem. What was supposed to be temporary has now effectively become permanent. We must do something about this problem.
I'm joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett of the U.S. Virgin Islands. And Congresswoman, I have to tell you, many of us rose to our feet when we heard that. And you made that point that I think a lot of people forget, that, you know, some 4 million Americans, overwhelmingly Americans of color, brown and black folk from Puerto Rico to the Northern Mariana Islands, and including the 700,000 some odd residents of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, pay taxation without full representation. They can't have their representatives vote for speaker. Why did you feel moved to make that point today?
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you so much, Joy, for amplifying this issue for us. You know, we can't sit idle, and we can't be comfortable in the positions that we're in. While I have a vote in committee, a full vote in committee, I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, the most powerful committee in Congress. I can vote when we're in the Committee of the Whole. The fact that I could not vote for Speaker, and my children were there with me, Virgin Islanders were watching me and not hearing my name. And I had gone the day before to the election of Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, the new governor of Puerto Rico. And to know that we are people who represent the largest block in per capita of veterans and still cannot vote for our commander in chief and do not have a vote for speaker, I just couldn't sit silent. I was sitting there. I was sitting next to Jonathan Jackson, the son of Jesse Jackson. He gave me a piece of paper as he saw me scribbling on the back of one and just put some notes. I've been working on this issue for many, many years about self-determination. And you know, Joy, that this has become a perpetual issue for people of the territories once we became brown people from the territories. In our country, so many states were at one point territories and eventually were allowed statehood. But in the cases that are called the insular cases at the turn of the 20th century, by the same justice who wrote Plessy v. Ferguson, he stated that the people who live in the territories are savage aliens who cannot understand Anglo-Saxon principles of law and therefore should not be given the full rights of American citizenship. Now, mind you, we have signed ourselves up to be part of the draft. And in fact, the people of the island that I live on, that my family is from, St. Croix, sent to this nation one of the children that we reared, Alexander Hamilton, to actually write the Constitution. And then to turn around and say that we can't understand principles of rule of law is just absolutely racism, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, I mean, we learned, I think a lot of people didn't understand. I mean, people from Puerto Rico get asked for their passports by sometimes TSA agents. They are not, but they can't vote for president unless they actually physically come to the mainland. I mean, it is absolute discrimination, and it is treating the territories as colonies. So I commend you for pointing it out that there needs to be full enfranchisement.
You can move to Brussels, you can move to Paris, you can move to the Congo and just get an absentee ballot and vote for president. But if you, Joy Reid, or anyone in your family or anyone else move to a U.S. territory and resides there, then you give up your right to vote for president. It's got to end. And I want to thank Hakeem Jeffries I spoke with him beforehand and told him I was going to do it. And he was like, Stacey, speak for your people. So I want to thank my leader for being someone who's willing to do that and stand up for the rights of the 4 million people in the territories.
Indeed. And I want to end this segment just by playing a little bit of Hakeem Jeffries, because he gave, other than your comments, I think after that, the other amazing comments today really came from leader Hakeem Jeffries. Let me play that really quick.
House Democrats will fight hard to protect working class Americans and the things that matter to them, not the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. Keep your hands off Social Security and Medicare.
And with that, I will thank Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett of the U.S. Virgin Islands, always representing. Thank you, good sister.
Thank you so much, and happy New Year's, my soror.
Thank you, soror. Much appreciated.